Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word in danger of losing its meaning altogether. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Steve Hinch, author of the new book, Winning Through Innovation, Lessons from the Front Lines of Business. He is a Benjamin Franklin Award-winning author with decades of management experience in high tech, including senior management in R&D, marketing, and general management at Hewlett Packard and its spinoff company, Agilent Technologies. He served as president and CEO of TeamLogic IT, a provider of IT support for small and medium-sized businesses, and now serves as a consultant to senior executives in high tech. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jared. I appreciate you having me here.
I'm thrilled for the discussion. Why don't we dive right in? What, to your mind, is innovation?
Yeah, so let me start by saying that my experience with innovation is in the business world, and so that's what I will talk about. And if you do a Google search on what innovation is, you'll find something along the lines of inventing something new. But in the business world, inventing something new is not enough. You need to do more than that. And so here is how I define it. Innovation is the ability to see opportunity in places others do not and turn that vision into profitable reality. Now, notice the two parts to that definition. The ability to see the opportunity, that's the innovative idea, and the ability to turn that into profitable reality, which is the ability to deliver. In the business world, you can have all the great ideas you wanted, but if you can't deliver them, they're useless. And one other thing I will say is that there are different kinds of innovation. Some authors classify it into as many as 14 categories.
Wow.
But as a manager, my job is to simplify things so that they're easier to act on. And so I classify innovation into 4 categories. It's either product innovation or process innovation, and either incremental innovation or disruptive innovation. Now, product innovation is what captures everybody's imagination. The latest BMW sports car will get lots of press and everybody will be excited about it. But process innovation can be even more powerful because if you think about it, if you improve the process for manufacturing BMW automobiles, that improves it for every vehicle that goes through that process, not just the fancy new sports car hyped in the press. Incremental innovation is focused on improving current products that you sell to current customers. Disruptive innovation is where you're inventing something new for a class of customers that you've never dealt with before, and it's so much better than what they currently use that it completely changes the marketplace. And one example, fairly recent, back in 2010, Apple introduced their first iPad. And that was a disruptive innovation because suddenly a whole class of customers decided, I don't need to use a laptop computer anymore. I can just use an iPad. Now, all of the iPads that have been introduced since then are incremental innovations because they don't sell to new customers. They sell to customers that have already used iPads in the past. And so that's sort of how I classify the different forms of innovation.
Now, that is such a helpful and simple rubric and way of thinking about it. I love the simplicity and elegance of it. The example of the iPad is so important. I think sometimes when something is disruptive, people just assume it's going to stay in that category. And there's no real reason to look for the next disruptive iPad. I don't know why someone would be at Apple right now working on how do I create a disruptive Gen 17 iPad.
Right.
And so I really appreciate that distinction in the example. Yeah, you disrupt and then you incrementally continue to capture that profit that you talked about. You find new ways to deliver that delivery aspect of your definition of innovation. I think that's brilliant.
Thank you.
How do you help people? You talked about being a manager and your role being to help people wrap their heads around things like this. How do you help people understand the importance of not just seeing the opportunity, but also delivering? Because in my work experience, I've seen a lot of people, when they hear innovation, they think of ideas, ideation, blue sky, let's go somewhere and put Post-its on a wall, but don't always think about the back end of your definition, the delivery, the capture, the profit.
So there's different things to think about here. That's sort of a broad question. But the first thing that I think falls to the senior leadership of a company, particularly in large multinational companies, but even in small companies. And I've worked in both environments, spent a fair amount of my time in large corporations like Hewlett Packard and its spin-off company, Agilent Technologies, but I've also spent 15 years serving the small business market. So I sort of know it all. And one of the key things is that managers have to understand that how you manage innovation is not the same way that you manage a formal project. Let's say it's time to introduce a new replacement for my latest laptop computer. And you've got a project team working on it. They've got a year and a half to deliver, and here's your budget, and here's the milestones that you need to hit. Well, innovation, you can't manage that way. And it's because when you first start coming up with an innovative idea, you do not know where it's going to go. You don't know the market well enough. You don't know whether the technology that you're working on will really pan out. And so managing innovation needs to be a process that allows you to weave in and out in different directions, depending upon what you learn for the market, depending upon what you learn in terms of how your technology is working. And so if you're a manager, you can't manage it by saying, here's your budget, here's the deliverable, and here's when you need to get it to us by.
Right.
First of all, in a disruptive innovation environment, to begin with, when you're still exploring things, you're probably only going to be able to say, I can fund this project for the next 3 months. And I'll decide after you come back with the results that you've given me, whether I'm going to give you another 3 months to keep working. And after the 6 months, okay, you're doing well enough that I'll fund it for another 6 months. And eventually, you will get to the point where it's more of a formal project that you can manage. But the whole initial part of the investigation phase is not that. And so people that are wanting to know how they can innovate and whether you'll support innovation have to understand that.
I was just reflecting on what you were saying, and it struck me that some of these concepts now, I'm sure you've heard of them, but some of these front-end work processes, front end of innovation and other things that sort of put this stage gate process together for managing innovation, I could see how they'd be built on the concept you just described. Okay, we'll do this for a few months and we'll check and see if we should continue. But the programs I've been part of in that still had a date. It was 5 years out.
Right.
But it still had a place where it plugged into the business plan for the organization. And so even if you do the 3-month comeback check, let's wait and see it, you still have that number, that date, 5 years out, kind of looming in the back of your mind. And I wonder if that negates some of the benefit of what you're describing. The 3 months come back and let's see, even if you still have the 5-year number sitting out in front of you.
So let's think about it in a little different perspective. Imagine you were in a startup company. Startup company probably does not have, here's what it's going to be, we expect you 5 years out. The startup company is more of, we need to get something on the market in 6 months in order to start generating some revenue and proving to the market that we really have something to exist. The corporate world doesn't like working that way.
Right.
And that's one of the key challenges. Is actually something that I call, in the book, actually, I call it the curse of the corporate business model, which gets in the way of innovation.
Yes.
Because Wall Street expects them to deliver consistent profits and growth every quarter. And if you're funding a innovation project that's going to take 2 or 3 years before it returns anything, that's not consistent with what Wall Street expects.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that you can't innovate in a large corporation, but it just means that you need to figure out a way to do that within the constraints. In Hewlett Packard, we figured out a way to do that for a major innovation project that I was once involved in.
That's a great point. And that sort of quarterly cadence that Wall Street has established for large companies, I feel like they want you to deliver on your financials, but they also want to hear an innovation story that makes them believe in the future.
That's right.
And I think that's the tricky part. And it sounds like you were able to solve it at Hewlett Packard, where you can do enough innovation work to have the story to help them believe that you will deliver in the future, but not so much that you impact your quarter.
That's right. And that's a key point. For a large corporation, it's a little easier to do this because you can keep the innovation project funded separately, and it's small enough that it's not going to have a major impact on the results that you share with financial investments.
Right.
But it's still a story that you can tell those investors, here's what we're doing to go after some new markets.
Right. To me, that goes back to your definition about seeing the opportunity. It's not just about the company seeing the opportunity and the employees seeing the opportunity. It's also about investors and consumers being able to see the opportunity to buy into the story and to buy into the brand promise if it's a product or a service.
That's absolutely true. And you have to be a little careful if you're the CEO of the company. You can't share so much that all your competitors are going to know exactly what you're doing and figure out how to counter.
Right.
In this innovation project that I did at Hewlett Packard, one of the things that I had to do that I talk about in the book, but you never read about in any of the other books, is we were not the number one competitor. And I needed to make sure that the company that was the number one competitor didn't know what I was doing and was complacent so that when we did launch the new product, they weren't able to respond. And that company actually was not able to respond for 6 years. And that's something that, depending upon how much you share with the world, I would have not shared anything about what I was doing with any outside investors or with the public. Another thing I did as part of this project is we created a little phantom project that did get leaked out that our competitor looked at and they said, that's nothing. I don't have to worry about that. So there's a lot more to innovation than just coming up with the new thing.
Right.
But anyway, that was a challenge for me, but it worked out well.
That's a great story. Great story. And another great example of innovation being more than, I don't know if you said this explicitly, but it's more than the technology. It's more than the enabling way of doing things. It's how you manage it. It's how you communicate it. It's how you position it as a benefit or as a product promise to the consumer. It's how you position it with shareholders. All of that goes into successful and sustainable innovation.
That's absolutely right.
I love your definition of innovation. Love to hear from you. What, to your mind, isn't innovation?
Good question. So I've got a couple of thoughts there, and they're going to be different than probably what you're expecting me to say. Innovation, first of all, is not some mysterious process that's only carried out by a few super smart individuals in a back room somewhere. Everybody in your organization can contribute to innovation. They just need to know how to do it, and they need to feel that it is okay that they'll get supported if they do it. And then the other thing, and I already sort of alluded to this, is innovation is not just something that happens in one big fell swoop. The first idea that you have for what should be this innovative idea is probably not going to be what you end up with. And you need to be accepting of that fact. And you and your management team needs to accept that things are going to change. The idea that you initially proposed to them is not going to be what you end up with, but that's still okay.
Two very important points. I'm so glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
Support. You mentioned support as a critical element of this. What makes support so important? Support of your employees so important? And what forms of support have you seen be most helpful?
Okay. So it's a little different depending upon whether you're in a corporate environment or whether you're in a small business environment, a startup environment. So let's talk about the corporate environment first, because that's the one where there's the most opportunity to mess things up.
Yes.
What I have seen, and even in Hewlett Packard, I had to deal with the fact that senior management expected every innovation project to be successful. And if you weren't successful, that could jeopardize your career. So if people understand what's going to happen, they're not going to innovate. And they're going to think that's okay, because in a large corporation, there are very few penalties, if any, for not innovating. As long as you're delivering your quarterly results, you're okay, until suddenly you're not delivering those anymore because the market has changed. So if your senior management expects you to make every innovation project successful, give up, go find another company to work for. Because in the startup world, 80% of startups fail. But that doesn't discourage the venture capital funding, because the venture capitalists know that the 20% that are successful will more than offset the 80% that aren't. And the 80% that aren't, I hesitate to even call them failures, because you learn stuff. And you can learn stuff that makes the 20% more valuable.
Mm.
If you've got a senior leadership team that doesn't understand that and is not prepared to support that kind of thing, it's going to be hard for you to innovate. Now, that doesn't mean that every failure is okay, because sometimes failures are because the team screwed up or the manager didn't know what he was doing. And you've got to deal with that kind of stuff. But if it failed because the market turned out not to be there or the technology you tried to use wasn't there, that's okay. I mean, Thomas Edison, he failed 3,000 times before he invented the light bulb. If he'd given up after that first failure, we'd still be using candles in the dark.
Yeah, or after the 2000th failure, right? I mean, it's just, yeah, that's such an important point.
Yep.
To your point about the 20% success, 80% quote unquote failure, if you look at the 20% and you draw the line back from the founder, what were they doing before that 20%? They were probably in one of those 80% companies.
Oh, that's right. Absolutely. Yep.
I agree. There's really no substitute for getting out there, learning, trying things, building something, and exposing it to the market, see what people think. And sometimes you get it wrong. But that takes me back to your definition of process innovation. I think what serial entrepreneurs and successful corporate innovators understand, people that build 15, 20, 30-year careers in innovation in corporate world, is just that you're not working on product X that's sitting in front of you. You're working on the process of solving a business problem or capturing an opportunity. And it may take 4 or 5 iterations of the product, but as long as you can demonstrate progress and understand what better looks like, there's a path to solving the problem, to move you from the 80 to the 20.
That's really an important point. I think you hit it exactly right, is that it's a sort of another way to frame my view that where you start out is not going to be where you end up, because it's going to take several iterations to get it to exactly where the market wants it. Where you want it is probably not as important as where the market wants it.
Yep, that's exactly right, which is a hard thing to come to terms with, which is, the market.
Yeah.
The market is boss. At P&G, they always used to say consumer is boss.
Yep.
Which is just true. So I think that process piece, like you talked about with the BMW, the car versus the process, I think that is something that doesn't get discussed enough. So I'm really glad you kind of teased that apart, because it underpins, I almost feel like process innovation is how serial product innovators are successful. If you see someone that keeps putting out great product after great product, iPhone, iPad, Apple, the App Store, things like that, they're not great product innovators. They're great process innovators, and their incredible process is spinning off products.
And I'll add to that, because you sort of hit on it, which is the first innovation you do, the first time you do an innovation, you'll probably be part of that 80% that fail. But the more you do it, you'll learn, and you'll know what it takes to be successful. And that's one of the other problems in the corporate world, is that there are very few corporations that structure innovation so that if one innovation project is successful, the knowledge for what it took to make that successful gets spread across the whole corporation. It's always sort of in isolation. And even when I did my innovation for HP that contributed well over $2 billion of revenue to the company over the first several years, we never took our knowledge and shared it with the rest of HP. I actually made a proposal to the CEO of the company at the time for how we could do that. But that was right at the time the Great Recession crashed everything, and we had to cut everything back. So I wasn't able to move forward with that. But that's something to worry about.
I agree. I mean, I can think of examples of projects that I worked on where they became sort of unicorns, unnecessarily so, where it was sort of put on a pedestal and, oh, well, this team solved this problem and this was a great team.
Yep.
And then you think about things like, and I'm split on this, I'm interested in your thought, but this whole idea of taking teams off site to a place separate so that they can do innovative things. Like, I think Ford, when they redid the Mustang, sent them somewhere else. Motorola, when they created the Razor, which still to me is one of the most underrated innovations.
Yeah.
I think they sent that team somewhere else. to me, that creates the risk. It creates a lot of benefits, but it also creates the risk of whatever comes back becomes, the thing that the Razor team did or the thing that the Mustang team did.
Mm-hmm.
Not a set of processes or tools that can be folded back into everyday work for the rest of the company.
So my view on that is there's two parts to that.
Mm-hmm.
There's the part where you create the dedicated team that's going to work on the new car and separate it from a reporting structure side of things from the rest of the company. And then there's the other part of that is, do you physically move them somewhere else?
Right.
I'm not a great fan of that. I mean, it can work, and it will probably work easier for software projects than for hardware projects, because for hardware, there's a whole infrastructure in that factory that you need to be able to interact with.
Mm-hmm.
Software projects tend to be more, you don't need to pull a lot of other resources from inside the organization to help with those. So I fully support the idea of making that innovative team separate in a reporting structure and not hold them accountable to delivering monthly and quarterly results.
Mm-hmm.
You measure them differently. You measure them by, here are the deliverables that I promised over the next 3 months. Did you do them?
Mm.
And move it from there.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way of thinking about it, and disaggregating the sort of elements of that are super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You've had an amazing career spanning lots of different aspects of innovation and tech, high tech. I wonder, how has innovation itself sort of shaped your career?
Well, being in high tech, innovation is sort of what's expected of me.
Yeah.
My career has been all over the map. I started out as a manufacturing engineer for HP, supporting products that were already in production, and I didn't have a lot of opportunity to do brand new innovations there.
Mm-hmm.
But then I moved into research and development, leading project teams there, and that's where I did this major project innovation. I was laughing because when you were saying earlier about how executives hold up an innovation project as, here's an example that everybody else should follow. And that's what they did with us.
Mm-hmm.
For like 3 years. Every time I went to a meeting, senior leaders were talking about how this DCA project was the thing that people need to emulate. And then I moved into marketing, and I'd never spent a day in marketing before they made me the head of a $300 million a year business. And it was the only job in marketing that I could do, because all I had to do was tell everybody else what to do, and they knew what to do.
Mm.
And then I became general manager. And because I had experience in manufacturing, R&D, and marketing, I feel like that made me a better general manager, because I knew all three of those businesses and what it takes to be successful there. Eventually, I got tired of the large corporation, and I went off and became president of my own little company. And now I'm consulting. So innovation has been sort of all along in my career, doing different kinds of things.
Yeah, that's amazing. One thing that stuck out to me as you were kind of outlining your journey is you speak about it as rather matter-of-factly, but as someone who's worked in big companies, going from manufacturing to R&D has some connotations associated with it. A manufacturing person is coming into R&D. They don't understand this.
Yep.
They, whatever.
Yep.
Moving from R&D to marketing brings some connotations with it. Who is this guy coming from R&D? He doesn't understand this. He doesn't know that. I feel like there's a lot of mental barriers that could come from that. And I think people might benefit from bouncing around a bit more if they understood how they might be successful doing that. How did you do it?
That's a good point. So the move from manufacturing to R&D was a little bit easier, because the same manager that I had been working for in manufacturing moved into R&D, and he brought me in with him.
Mm-hmm.
So that was easy. The move from R&D to marketing was not something I even wanted to do. My boss told me to do it. And you were exactly right. For about the first 6 months, the marketing team thought, who is this person from R&D that doesn't know anything about marketing? And I admitted, up until I took the job, my understanding of marketing was sort of along the lines of the old Dilbert cartoon that had Dilbert walking into marketing with the sign, "Welcome to marketing, 2-drink minimum." And it turns out that marketing is not that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really impressed with the skill level of the people in marketing that I was working with. they took it upon themselves to teach me what I needed to know in order to run them. And my job was really to run interference between what they needed to do and what the C-suite was pushing us to do. And so I was the barrier between them. And that worked out really well. They was happy that they didn't have to talk to our CEO about what they were doing. And I was happy that I didn't have to worry about doing all the things that they knew how to do better than me.
Yeah, that's the perfect setup. Your experience in the other functions made you a better barrier, I would imagine, and more of an anticipatory.
Yeah. And when I was in R&D, it was very important to me as I was launching this innovative new product that I was working closely with our marketing counterpart. So I understood what they were doing and why they needed to do it. And we had all sorts of discussions about different aspects. Even one question we had to deal with was, what are we going to call this product? Because if we call it the same thing as our big competitor, the customers will just think of us as a late entrant to an existing market.
Mhm.
But if we give it a completely brand new name, the customers will think of it as we're the first entrant in a new market. And that's what we did, and that's what really worked out.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Another thing that you don't think about in innovation is you think about inventing the new idea, but how do you position it not only so that customers like it, but so that the competition is pushed under the rug?
Mm. Yeah, it also determines the amount of marketing support that would be necessary. If you're going to kind of ride in the wake of something that's already out there, that's a different amount of money marketing wise, usually, than we're going to go create a category and teach people what this is and how it works and why it's better.
Yep.
That educational aspect usually changes the investment required.
That's absolutely right.
It's been an amazing conversation. I could talk to you about innovation all day. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask if you have any advice for innovators.
Sure. So I guess I'll give two pieces of advice, one for innovators in the corporate world and one for innovators in the startup world. In the corporate world, I've already sort of talked about this. Your job is to understand the curse of the corporate business model and the fact that Wall Street wants you to deliver consistent results every quarter, and funding innovation isn't consistent with that, especially disruptive innovation. You can always fund incremental innovations to improve the existing products. That's easy. But disruptive innovations to get into new markets, that's hard to do and keep Wall Street satisfied. But you can do it. You have to structure the innovation project as a separate line item that is measured by deliverables, not by profit and loss. And I know that that works because I was able to do it. But if you don't understand that, then you're not going to be successful. So that's the challenge for the corporate innovators. For the startup world, it's different. You might have a great idea, but if you need outside venture capital funding, you're not going to get it unless you are going after an innovation in an area that they've already identified as being a place that they're going to place their investments in. For example, artificial intelligence, almost doesn't matter what you come up with for artificial intelligence, they'll fund you.
Right.
But if you went to the venture capital industry and said, I want to create a new company that's going to sell laptop computers that compete against HP and Dell and Lenovo, you'd be kicked out of there so quick you wouldn't even have a chance to say goodbye. That doesn't mean you can't innovate. In fact, in my book, I have a whole chapter about a company called Carbon Systems that is doing exactly that. And they're about 8 years old now. And in the part of the computer market they're going after, they're growing much faster than any of the big three. But they can't get venture capital funding. They've been able to do all of that investment from friends and family kind of stuff. So you can still do it if you have this weird idea that the VC industry is not going to fund. But you just need to figure out a different way to fund it.
That's great advice. And I love how you targeted it to the different worlds of innovation because very different sets of circumstances and they require a different approach.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your time.
Well, and it's great. I really appreciate this podcast. I think you're providing a real service. And as I said before, I've listened to others of your podcasts, and those are good messages that people are trying to work on innovation really need to hear.
Thank you so much, Stephen. You just did an amazing job of contributing to what all the other guests I've brought before. I'm grateful to you and everyone else for being generous with their expertise and their time. Steve Hinch, author of Winning Through Innovation, Lessons from the Front Lines of Business. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get more insights from innovators across the world. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional content and conversation. I hope to see you there. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.